Women typically apply around 160 toxins to their bodies by choice. No one in society forces them to wear makeup. If you view the state as a company, you must keep your inhabitants or employees under control. You need to keep them as sedated as possible, as dumbed down as possible, because in the end, there's a whole industry that benefits from all of that. I noticed that every nutritionist or trainer on social media appeared in stories or reels promoting their discount code. I realized the supplement industry was doing what we've criticized the pharmaceutical industry for.
Why are these called modern diseases? Does that mean older societies had no record of them, or did they not exist?
There is no prevalence of type 2 diabetes, no prevalence of autoimmune diseases, no prevalence of cancer, no prevalence of cardiovascular diseases, no prevalence of Alzheimer's. And when you see how they live, of course, they are grounding all the time, exposing themselves to the sun while moving, eating only real food provided by their environment, moving around all the time. Just so people have an idea, the Hadza men move around 15,000 steps a day, and the women around 10,000. What's going on in today's society? Who actually walks 15,000 steps?
What is your opinion about sunscreen creams? Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Factory. Today I have the great pleasure of having an expert in supplementation with me, someone who is a critic of the entire industry, a person who focuses on delivering an extremely important message about the importance of muscle mass, the decline of testosterone, and the loss of masculinity. David De Ponte, welcome David, how are you?
Thank you, brother. I appreciate the invitation. Let's give it our all.
On top of that, my compatriot, the thing is that you actually have the accent.
I don't have much left either.
No, I mean, do you still have some? They call me a damn Galician. All the Venezuelans are really tough on me. They've exiled me themselves. Yeah, solely and exclusively because of my accent?
Yeah, no, you don't have any left? You don't have a trace of it anymore?
No, it's normal here too. I have very little left. Well, David, I gave a brief description of your background and your fight on social media, but I'd like you to do it as well. How would you define yourself?
Look, really, what I try to do is create a channel for sharing information more than anything else. I mean, a channel through which I know a lot of people don't have a voice. They focus on patient care, so they can't really dedicate themselves to sharing content one-on-one, can they? So I've built this channel so that people can really get to share that information on social media and talk about what's happening in the world of health, which otherwise suddenly they wouldn't have the opportunity to do.
But what specific health topics do you cover so the audience has context about you? How would you define the key points of your outreach?
The key points of my outreach? I think it's first focused on science and evidence above all. I mainly focus on showing the other side of the coin. The B side of supplementation is rarely discussed on social media, even though much else is shared. All the benefits and attributes of supplementation, which it definitely has. But usually they're not discussing everything it truly is. All the adverse effects that exist in the world of supplementation.
Let's discuss supplementation. First, let's define it, and then I want you to give me your critique based on the data you have about it.
All right, where do you want us to start with?
Where do you feel more comfortable or consider yourself more of an expert? David.
Look, Charlie, honestly, nowadays I actually speak out a bit against supplementation, if you can call it that, because I started out selling supplements. Then I realized that people ended up becoming addicted. That supplement, I was selling them without knowing that suddenly it had side effects, or without even knowing that it probably wasn't helping them achieve their goal. When you realize someone is that addicted to a product, likely helping only by placebo effect, it makes sense. Simply put, if a person believes it helps them, it does. But really what is supporting that transformation is everything related to diet and training, and not necessarily supplementation. So of course, that's when my perspective started to change a bit about whether I was really helping that person or not. Through that product I was selling them.
Which product do you think this happened with most? The addiction and placebo effect you mentioned?
I think that in most cases it's with pre-workouts where you see that
It is
that level of addiction in the person because of the sensations they feel in their body.
okay, and can it be defined as an addiction?
Well, of course, if you ask someone who is suddenly an expert in pharmacology in terms of components and ingredients, they'll probably tell you no. It's not truly addictive since it lacks an ingredient that causes real addiction. But just because of the sensations it gives you, that product, because of what it makes you feel, above all, that level of strength it can give you before a workout. That affects you psychologically, and it affects you a lot because you feel it during a workout when you reach the point where you stop. For most pre-workouts, caffeine is usually the main active ingredient.
So you could pretty much say that people are consuming a lot of pre-workouts when in reality what actually works is the caffeine. So coffee might have the same effect.
It's just an overrated coffee. Overpriced, sorry. You're basically paying for the caffeine in a pre-workout. Everything else, all the coloring, everything that gives you that physical sensation is just an extra. But that's like when you buy toothpaste and it has a mint flavor and the person thinks that's what's giving them fresh breath or the sweetness, for example, from the toothpaste itself. Isn't that what's actually cleaning your teeth, like when you clean your house? And the smell it has from the perfume? It's common to walk in, notice a pleasant scent, and think it smells clean. But that doesn't always mean it's actually clean. It could just be perfume. So the industry knows this very well and knows that with those sensations, with those flavors, they create that, well, of course, let's call it addiction. Yeah, I think it might sound very strong, but in the end, it's a kind of hook that traps you with that product. Keep in mind that once you have those sensations and you start to train harder, in quotes, then the day you stop, you're going to feel the crash in a brutal way.
Okay, one question. And what would you tell me about supplementation, for example, magnesium, zinc, all that?
Look, well, here we could talk about it. There are supplements that don't have evidence by themselves, and there are supplements that can be very manipulated in the industry. Actually, here in Europe, it's usually regulated.
In the United States, they'll sell you anything?
The thing is, the problem is that the Food and Drug Administration is reactive. What does that mean? It means that if you want to release, what is the Food and Drug Administration?
Excuse me, David, for those who don't know, what is the Food and Drug Administration?
Supposedly, the agency is responsible for regulating everything about medicines and drugs. And the problem is that this regulation, like I was saying, is usually, at least when it comes to supplements, reactive. What does that mean? Can you release the supplement to the market? And once there is harm, if that harm, obviously, if enough people come forward and report that harm, and then the Food and Drug Administration takes the product off the market, analyzes it, and decides if changes are needed. But then the problem is that there are a lot of supplements that don't have evidence. They really don't have scientific evidence. They may contain things among the ingredients that aren't listed on the label, or on the contrary, say something on the label that the supplement doesn't actually contain. So then on top of that, there's also the issue of ingredient manipulation within Latin America. Even today, they've made seals and QR codes to track supplements. But do you have any? For example, BCAAs, just so you know, are one of the best-selling supplements, and they're also one of the least useful. Top-selling, most used by bodybuilders. Of course, if you're just an outsider watching, you might think, well, if a bodybuilder takes it, it's because he probably knows something, so it makes sense for him to take it. It's one of the least supported supplements and unnecessary if you already eat a protein-rich diet.
Is that, for example, why doesn't it make sense?
It only gives you free amino acids, and they often use amino spiking here, which is that you can release a protein to the market and say it has X amount of protein, but in reality, it probably has less. They add free amino acids, so it looks like the protein content is higher during evaluation. They do this often, and it's very common. But then in Latin America, to give you an example, there you can find proteins that may even have less protein, percentage-wise, than powdered milk. That's due to manipulation and lack of control, especially in the supplement industry in Latin America.
So, are you basically saying that supplementation isn't necessary to achieve certain physical results?
Look straight ahead. Speaking of scientific evidence, it's estimated that supplementation can support you by about 5 to 10%. That means the other 90% comes from lifestyle, nutrition, training, rest, circadian rhythms, and more. Supplements can only help with about 5 to 10%. What happens? For a competitor, that could mean the difference between missing and making the podium, or going from third to second or first place. But most people, over 90%, don't have that.
Do they go to the gym and so on? Yes, of course.
Yes, it would make sense. If there is a deficiency, listen, I always clarify this. If there is a proven deficiency, if you have a nutritional deficiency, and I don't know, for example, are you vegan? So I don't know if you would ever be vegan at some point.
David, don't offend me, we're friends.
But assuming that at some point in your life you tried it, would you definitely have to take supplements? This is where supplementation can really help, especially considering that at the very least there are deficiencies, generally nutritional, but that's because foods have lost their nutritional value. Yes.
I understand. You mentioned something earlier that interests me, and my friend Carlos Magno often talks about it. Circadian rhythms. How important are they for optimizing the body?
It's everything. I mean, I think that here many times on social media, people have discussed what the 80-20 is, right? If 80 is training, 20 is supplements, let's go.
Let's start with David. What are circadian rhythms?
Circadian rhythms are our body's biorhythms, regulated by sunlight exposure. Imagine every cell in your body has a clock that's set by sunlight exposure. Constantly exposing your cells to artificial light is like living in limbo, because it's not intense enough for your body to think it's daytime or solar noon. So your body is constantly kind of lost, not knowing what time of day it is, especially when it's dark outside and you have all that lighting inside. Circadian rhythms are just that. They're simply the rhythms of our body, the functions that our body has at the level of each organ and each system. They're controlled by sunlight exposure. The sun provides your body with the information it needs to know what to do and when.
Okay. So, where is the importance, or why are circadian rhythms so important for optimizing a muscular physique or optimizing your physique in general?
Because it basically regulates all functions, not only of the body itself, but also functions, for example, at the liver level, at the digestive level. Yeah, the body is prepared to have certain functions during the day, during sun exposure, and it has other functions to perform during the night. If you ignore natural day and night cycles, as most people do, what are you really experiencing? Especially here in Europe or anywhere, prime time starts after 9. All the parties, celebrations, soccer, everything starts after 9. That disrupts circadian rhythms. That's why especially you see that people who work night shifts or double shifts are more likely to develop certain types of cancer.
So, is sun exposure vital for health?
Absolutely. And here, well, there's a lot of evidence behind it. Obviously, evidence that supports it. The curious thing is that if you look, for example, we can bring up the topic of multiple sclerosis, a really tough autoimmune disease that slowly paralyzes you more and more with each flare-up. When you pay attention...
Hawking, for example.
Correct, yes. When you realize that, the closer you are to the equator, even right on the equator, speaking about planet Earth, the prevalence of multiple sclerosis is almost zero. And as you go further north or south in latitude, the prevalence increases. And does it increase the further north you are, or does it increase the further south you are? And this is precisely because of sun exposure. Keep in mind that during our evolution, most of the time we were exposed to the sun and our bodies simply adapted to that exposure. It's clear that obviously if you're someone who comes from a Nordic country, you're adapted to receiving less sun. That's why people with fair skin and light eyes often share other traits. They have a different phototype. That's why if you take someone from a Nordic country to a Caribbean country like Venezuela or Colombia, that person faces a higher skin cancer risk, especially with too much sun exposure. But the reverse can also occur. You take a person from Africa, that is a person with a much darker skin phototype, and bring them to a Nordic country where they don't have the necessary level of sun exposure. So their prevalence also increases, meaning the risk of suffering from some type of chronic disease of that kind.
Okay, so why is it that nowadays in Spain and in Europe in general there's kind of a war going on for saying that sun exposure can be harmful and that whenever we are exposed to the sun they want us to use sunscreen? What is your opinion about sunscreens?
Look, it's interesting because, yeah, if you go to Mexico and try to get into a cenote, which are these natural freshwater holes, they won't let you. They ban all lotions, moisturizers, and sunscreen because they harm the ecosystem. I mean, it's literally forbidden. And honestly, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it doesn't make sense to me to put it on. I don't know how many toxins a sunscreen product has. It probably has between 20 and 30 definitely toxic chemicals. Understanding that the largest organ in our body is the skin, and the skin is permeable, it's not impermeable like most people think. Many molecules, depending on their size, can pass through the skin, enter the blood, and must be eliminated by the body. So it doesn't make sense to try to block the sun, especially when there's plenty of evidence in the scientific literature showing that in the end, the sun not only allows you to synthesize vitamin D, but it also has many other functions. Among them is the one I mentioned before, which is the information our cells receive to know when to carry out certain processes. So if you're blocking it, you're blocking the sun's signal to your body. And on top of that, like I said before, most of those toxins enter your bloodstream and your body must eliminate them. And the one that works is the liver, but that's not the only toxin we introduce into our body. You have to take into account that women have makeup. On average, a woman puts about 160 toxins on her body. It's their own choice, since no one in society forces them to wear makeup. It's clearly their decision. Well, that would be a whole other podcast, another topic, yes.
About intra-female competition and many more things.
Now that you're talking about competition, it's interesting. If you want, we can discuss bodybuilding later. When do you notice the bodybuilders? Men are competing with each other and women are competing with each other with the whole issue of plastic surgeries.
Totally. I mean, I think that bodybuilding isn't for other women, I think. I completely agree with you. I don't think under any circumstances that women get surgery to be more attractive in the eyes of men. Maybe a specific woman who has a problem, for example, someone extremely disproportionate, or I can agree with you that these things can help. Well, but when the Brazilian butt lift is already excessive, the lips, the nose, the eyelashes, the Botox everywhere, I think that's just competition between them, right? Isn't it true men rarely find women extremely attractive? Look,
that's exactly what I've talked about with some aesthetic doctors. When I realized that, at least in my circle of male friends, we don't like that kind of thing. And that's when you realize that they're doing it to compete with each other. This happened to me once at a book presentation in Colombia, where I had two girls sitting beside me. When they turned sideways, though just friends and not related, they had the same profile, nose, lips, and cheekbones. You notice it, and it's the same in bodybuilding. It's even happened on the street. You put up a picture with 6 body types, with 9 different men's body types. From a slim model to the most muscular and largest bodybuilder. And for women, practically out of every 10, none of them like the bodybuilder, the one with injections, to put it that way. Most of them like the slim and defined one. That's when you realize men also compete with each other because of dominance issues and I don't know, other reasons. I wouldn't know how to define it, but...
Yes. It's a matter of intersexual competition between us. So, David, do you think toxic behaviors have always been like this, even since last century? Did it all begin then? Do you think it's intentional? To intoxicate us, to give us negative information, to keep us from getting sunlight, to make it so that if we do get sunlight, it's with endocrine disruptors all over our skin. I've had wild arguments just for saying that. I don't use sunscreen. I get burned once, but not again, and still don't apply it.
And besides, the body adapts pretty well. I lived in Mexico, in Yucatan, and I could spend the whole day, literally the whole day, exposed to the sun and I wouldn't get burned. But that was because I had already gone through the adaptation process. And let me tell you something. Do you know the cost of biological treatment for diseases like multiple sclerosis? Do you have any idea at least? It's around $80,000 to $100,000 depending on the country and method, but about $80,000. The alternative that is currently being proposed, because this is a recently published article, is precisely to make use of ultraviolet B lamps. It's been observed, especially with autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. Does it help? The disease occurs when someone is exposed, like to a lamp, often because they're after your money. Still, it's about the lamp. We're discussing a $2,000 option versus a biological treatment that costs $80,000 or $100,000 and must be taken for life. And that's why, especially with autoimmune diseases and their clear link to sun exposure, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, if you see the state as a company and you have to maintain your employees who are also your inhabitants, you need to keep them as sedated as possible, as dumbed down as possible, as sick as possible, because in the end, there's a whole industry that benefits from all of that.
I totally agree with that thought. David, I have a question. Have you ever being part of that industry, you told me, have you ever been a consumer of all these products, of all these toxic things? When did you awaken? What caused the shift? At what point do you decide to spread the word about the dangers of all these industries? That all they want is to take our money, and maybe without giving us any benefit in return.
Look, there were several points in time when I started to realize that the answer wasn't in supplementation. And none of them in the most recent, or at least from a few years ago. I noticed that on social media, every nutritionist or trainer would appear in stories or reels with their discount code. I realized the supplement industry was doing exactly what we've criticized the pharmaceutical industry for.
Totally. That
Is buying the way doctors walk? Well, the way they walk is just a way of saying it, yes.
I understand.
They buy absolutely everything from them. So, of course, when you realize that the supplement industry hasn't done anything different, they're just paying influencers and nutrition and training professionals to promote their products. You have to understand that there's something behind it that probably won't come to light. Because if everyone is selling out, then obviously there won't ever be anyone criticizing it. That was the most recent thing, but it's true that it's been at least more than a decade since I started selling supplements. There was a supplement on the market called Jack. It's like Jack, it has a 3 and a D, and back then I used to sell that supplement in Venezuela. If I remember right, the Food and Drug Administration banned it in 2005. Because there was an ingredient that increased. I don't know if it was the likelihood of heart attacks. There was an ingredient that shouldn't have been there. And that's when I realized the Food and Drug Administration acted reactively. If the Food and Drug Administration suspended it in 2005, I was likely still selling it in 2008. How do you find out? You don't find out? What if you stock up? If you're a supplement company, I honestly didn't know. If I owned a store and a supplement distribution company in Venezuela or Latin America and you're fully stocked with this product, you're not going to take it off the market because you still have to. Because the company that makes the product isn't going to give you any benefits. They're not going to give you your money back for pulling a product off the market. So I think that when you understand there's always an intention behind things, when there's an interest behind it, you have to know there's always another side to the coin. I focused on researching everything because in the end, it is not that supplements don't have side effects. I mean, they have effects that probably can't be advertised. But there will always be side effects. What are those side effects? That's what literature is for, to identify them.
For example, this is Testosterone. You already tried it and said it tasted good, right? We've tried to make the healthiest drink possible, but it's true that it's a drink that has certain supplement customers. Because 90% of the population has a magnesium deficiency. Ginseng boosts sperm production and natural testosterone secretion. Zinc also helps. I've researched and these products do help. I mean, where is the fine line between supplementation that harms the body and a drink like this? Have you
Read it.
I mean, I'll let you do a critique. You, since you're involved in this.
All selective?
Completely.
Nothing.
Fine. Look,
Is it really true that most of the population is deficient in magnesium? I think magnesium is involved in about 400 to 600 functions in our body. And most of society is deficient. And not only because we no longer have a healthy diet or one based on real food, but even when it's based on real food, it's very likely to be deficient. Because the loss of nutrients that vegetables and fruits have suffered is around 50-70%. So it's all due to hybridization and all the manipulation that has been done to vegetables and fruits. So of course, nowadays you have to choose supplementation, especially for certain deficiencies. And it's true that on one hand we have a magnesium deficiency. On the other hand, zinc, which I saw is another ingredient it contains. It helps with all aspects of male hormonal health in this case. We discussed this before the podcast started. Is society experiencing a loss of masculinity because of low testosterone and also a decrease in sperm production and fertility?
so tea storage? Yeah, look, this wasn't planned. I want you to know that. This isn't a promotion. This is coming out completely naturally. So, would you say that this drink could actually be useful for people?
Yes, of course. Said I have to add the usual caveat. It's only useful if the person is also doing other things.
Attention, gentlemen, I want you to know this. Let me make a brief point. David. Taking 5 tea storage watermelons is pointless if you just watch porn, skip workouts, act lazy, and avoid sunlight. You have to pair this with living like a bear. Just drinking this alone doesn't make you a
Bear, okay? Not at all. That
is absolutely true. This helps. This isn't Panoramix's elixir that
drink and
you can't just slap and defeat Romans like that.
no, that's exactly what I was going to say. Drinking these beverages doesn't help you. But no matter how good the contract is, you're not the one doing the work out there. I mean, this drink isn't going to help you improve male hormonal health. If you're not getting sun exposure, not strength training, not eating enough protein, your circadian rhythms aren't synchronized, and so on and so forth. In other words, the drink isn't going to come and save your male hormonal health.
That's totally.
It's an extra, and it's that extra I was telling you about. Is it logical for someone already working on their hormonal health?
Gentlemen, don't buy testosterone unless you work out and are tough like bears or wild boars. Otherwise, I forbid it. Let's set a code. Just kidding. I meant you should send me workout photos. Is it a drink? It's a testosterone booster, but not for that. Let's say it's not a magic formula that
Keeps you from
working on everything you just listed extremely correctly in an extremely correct way. David, speaking of the drop in testosterone, speaking of the drop in masculinity, which, come on, masculinity and testosterone are extremely linked to
decline in a
of men. What do you think has been the main reason for that 40% drop from 1970 until today?
Look, well, among the main culprits is sun exposure, but there's also the issue of alcohol, processed foods, and obviously as a consequence of processed foods, obesity and being overweight. Can a man raise his testosterone levels simply by lowering his body fat percentage? Yes, obviously. Then there's the support, the help from supplements like zinc, magnesium, and so on. But does lowering your body fat percentage help you? So I think those are the three main culprits behind the feminization of male society. I don't think so. I don't know if that's the case. And here I'm going to get into something controversial because it seems to me that even the other side is, in a way, supporting that feminization. And not sure if this happens to you. You never lived in Venezuela.
Are you with them, David?
Women, because I don't know if you didn't live in Venezuela, but at least in Venezuela. It's very common when you talk to a woman, generally, and they have a partner who is overweight. I wonder if people value a man more when he has a belly and a beer in hand, as if that's what makes him a man. In a society, I'm talking specifically about a Latin society like the Venezuelan one. So I think that this feminization, in a way, I think is somewhat supported in a certain way also by the opposite sex. If you're with someone who has a belly, drinks alcohol, and lives unhealthily, but even so, don't you realize the damage that's being done to their hormonal health, even to their metabolic health, to their overall health? In a way, you're supporting that person having those low testosterone levels that are probably associated with low libido, worse body composition, and so on. That's also linked to other metabolic and hormonal health problems. It's not just, I have low testosterone and that's it.
I have a question. Are you actually a bear or just pretending to be one? I'm going to tell you an uncomfortable truth, and that is that you are the reflection of the people you surround yourself with. For years, I was trapped in an environment that led me nowhere, surrounded by people with no ambition, waiting for something to change. But the reality is that things don't change unless you take control of your life and surround yourself with the right people. That's why I started Club Red Pill 3.0, a space for men seeking to connect with real warriors. A space where we discuss key topics like masculinity, stoicism, and relationship dynamics, where we try to give you the necessary tools to reach your maximum potential. So you keep improving every day to become the man that this society so desperately needs. In addition, by joining, you get access to an exclusive section where you can ask questions to the guests of the factory and learn directly from the leaders in the industry. If you'd like to join the community, I'll put the link in the pinned comment. Let's get back to the podcast also. Earlier you were talking about toxins in food. To what extent? Do you think the industry... because people don't know, many people don't know that the pharmaceutical industry is strictly linked to the food industry. All the agrochemicals used for spraying, fertilizing and so on, come from the pharmaceutical industries. To what extent do you draw a correlation between that drop in testosterone and an intention by the pharmaceutical companies to have a more domesticated society?
Look, it's
Complex, of course.
In the end, like they say in Venezuela, you pay yourself and give yourself the change. If you owned a processed food business and knew it made people less healthy, would you open a gym next door? Because in the end, that's it. If you're not here eating processed foods, gaining weight, or harming your health, you're here to recover your health and physique. In the United States, they always take things to another level with some extreme examples. And they have studied so much how gyms work that even there are many gym chains that don't. The gym model works because people sign up but don't actually go.
They pay, but they don't go.
Of course, that's actually why they work as a business. Exactly because of that. Because if you really had the full capacity of a gym with 200, 300 people packed all the time, would the gym collapse as a training center? Wouldn't it be sustainable with so many people? You can sign up 1,000, but they expect half won't go. And most of that percentage who do go end up quitting before March at the beginning of the year. You charge them for the whole year, and halfway through, they quit. Usually between June and July, they launch new offers to attract new people to sign up for the rest of the year. They have plenty of money to invest and know exactly where people usually train less. And they know if, for example, that in the weight training area, where all the free weights are, that's usually where the people who are more consistent train. And I'm not going to mention the gym chain, but this gym chain made the weight training area smaller because they're not interested in having consistent people in the gyms. What do they do on Fridays? Posetas, they offer a pizza, for example, because they know the business works when people don't go. And what if it was? This is like, I'm going to open another can of worms, but this is like Tinder. Social networks like Tinder aren't made for you to find your ideal partner, because if they worked that way and you found your ideal partner, you'd leave.
So
what they do is create an addiction that keeps you inside. If you're not in them, you're in the solution or on the other side. That's why these industries invest on both sides.
I understand perfectly. So regarding pharmaceutical companies, do you think it's similar to what you said about gyms?
Yes, because in the end, it's about pharmaceuticals and nutrition. Understand that if nutrition is causing a problem, the person will seek a solution in the health industry. So you're there on the other side to offer them that solution, which in the end is just a palliative, a relief for that illness, and it creates a dependency for you. For example, in this case, would a biologic be used for an autoimmune disease? By creating that dependency, you gain a lifelong customer here and on the other side. You know, that person won't stop eating processed foods because they can't link their poor diet with the health problem they have. When does that become a health problem? If we mean modern diseases, like cardiovascular ones. Chronic diseases such as cancer and type 2 diabetes are called modern diseases because they're rare in isolated populations. People aren't able to associate their lifestyle with that disease. So you create a dependency on one side with the medication, and they already have a dependency on the other side with processed foods. And then you say, obviously with the illusion we all have of choice, when you go into a supermarket, you'll realize that you have the illusion that you can choose. Actually, just 8 or 10 corporations control that illusion from above, which many people may not realize. But generally, the brands choose where they are placed in the aisles, if they want to be located at the beginning of the aisles. If they want to have their product at a child's eye level at the checkout counter, they're addicted to processed foods on one side, then made dependent on the solution you offer on the other.
I liked calling them modern. Why are they called modern diseases? I mean that in older societies, these diseases weren't recorded or didn't exist.
There's no prevalence. In fact, even today, there are still isolated populations. Dr. Maria Gloria Dominguez researches isolated indigenous populations in the Amazon who remain separate from modern society. There's no prevalence. No prevalence of type 2 diabetes, no prevalence of autoimmune diseases, no prevalence of cancer, no prevalence of cardiovascular diseases, no prevalence of Alzheimer's. When you see how they live, of course, they're grounding all the time. That is, touching the earth, exposing themselves to the sun while moving, eating only real food provided by their environment, staying active. The Hadza, just so people have an idea, the Hadza men move around 15,000 steps a day and the women about 10,000. These tribes maintain that lifestyle, but what happens in today's society? Who moves 15,000 steps? You remove movement, real food, sun exposure, and grounding, which also offers anti-inflammatory benefits. You have a society isolated in a geometric concrete jungle. If these abilities aren't trained, other dependencies form. Our bodies aren't adapted. Do you think we have hardware that has evolved over millions of years, but in a context where it's no longer useful? So we haven't had enough time to adapt to this context we live in today? I'm doubtful we'll adapt. I don't think we will.
You don't agree because this isn't what it means to be human.
That's what we're seeing in society today. When you look at the numbers of how cardiovascular diseases, cancer, autoimmune diseases are increasing, you even realize that we're already paying the price. That well-known compound effect in economics and investing, you save, and over time, the cumulative impact becomes exponential. We're just starting to face the consequences of those accumulated bad habits.
Practically nothing.
The past 75, 100 years,
Yes, I have a question for you. So, are there no people with multiple sclerosis in the Amazon? Are there no people with cancer in the Amazon? There are no people in the Amazon with heart diseases. That is to say, all these diseases are consequences of the modern world.
in fact, that's why they're called modern diseases. I doubt there are any records of them today, especially in still isolated populations. There are records of autoimmune diseases or cancer. Probably in some other form there might be some. I'm not sure if records exist for this isolated Amazon population, but there is no prevalence of modern diseases like cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, or type 2 diabetes. So,
Can you openly say that this society as it is conceived, yes,
makes us sick,
does it make us sick?
literally. And
What solution would you give, David?
first, understand what your body needs as a Homo sapiens. And here, regardless of how the person identifies themselves, because I think there's a weird trend in society now to avoid identifying myself. With man or woman, that's great, whatever you want, but if you're a Homo sapiens, your body is going to ask for something, physiologically speaking. That's a diet of real food, trials, and nutrients. Movement or stimulus through strength training and sun exposure and respecting circadian rhythms as a Homo sapiens. No matter if someone identifies as a giraffe or a doll, that's what your body needs to stay healthy. So, if you want to survive, and more than just survive, really live with quality in this modern world, you need to know that you have to go look for that outside. You won't find it just sitting on your couch, watching Netflix, porn, or scrolling social media.
Hired on the spot. David, I loved it. I'm really enjoying this show. Honestly, I have a question. Have you talked about the benefits of grounding? What is grounding?
It's simply being in contact with the earth, with planet Earth, through the skin of your body. Specifically, it's believed that from an evolutionary standpoint, we were always in contact with our feet. The amount of nerve endings it has is incredible. And we're losing that important connection that not only allows you to, I think it's nature's ultimate anti-inflammatory, and it's been proven with evidence. But it also helps improve blood circulation. For example, what's behind so many cardiovascular diseases?
Have you heard of Luis Enrique?
The old good one.
Has he won the Champions League with Paris Saint-Germain? Have you heard if he said he lost or not yet? Does he not have allergies since he started grounding?
What do you think
About that?
Well, actually, a video of Sergio Ramos, also barefoot, went viral recently after he played the match without shoes. He even said it on camera, claiming he's done this his whole life. Of course, I think Luis Enrique used to do it too. In fact, I think he did it with the team he coached for Qatar. I'm not sure if it was before or after, but the players would remove their shoes on the grounds. I think it's one of those things that still seems very esoteric to us because we don't understand it. Because I think the main factor here is that we're not able to detect the speed at which our body exchanges electrons with the surface of the Earth. So since we still don't know how to measure it, we see improvements in terms of inflammation. We see improvements in terms of blood flow. But since we can measure it, we still don't know how it works. Something as simple as making contact with the Earth with our bare feet, or well, with our hands, with any part of the body.
But there is an argument that many people use to attack the ancient way of life, the ancient diet meat, which is that today we have double the life expectancy compared to 200 years ago. Is this true?
Or,
Are they lying?
look, me personally, I've discussed that with different experts in the field. Because it's not clear if it's manipulation of the records or just a lack of records. In ancient times, it's true that there was a lot of infant mortality. Of course, I think anyone here can calculate an average. If there are a lot of people who die at early stages, whether at the time of birth, under the age of 5 or 7, or even at young ages, because of the issue of wars.
Exactly, and it goes from being just lucky. The wars, I think it's extremely influential. And until World War II, the world was in a constant state of war. Feminists criticize me a lot for saying that men went to war, but war was the norm. No. War was a constant reality for every man throughout life.
Of course, and that's why I'm telling you, if you take the average, obviously the average life expectancy of the general population will go down. Assuming we live longer today, what are the conditions of those extra years? Does anyone actually want to live to 80 if the last 20 years are spent bedridden? So here we should really ask ourselves two questions. Are we actually living longer? And if we are we living worse? In worse conditions? So for me, I don't really think we're living many more years like people say.
These changes.
Plus, even if we live longer, those extra years are often spent in poor health.
In Seneca's book, he talks about 80-year-old elders. I mean, we're talking about the Roman Empire. But were the survivors truly strong? Let me explain.
Of course.
Back then, life was much tougher. It's true that there were many childhood diseases and not everyone survived. Only those who were fitter or adapted better made it. I agree with you. I have a war there.
It's true that many elderly people today live on pills all the time and lack quality of life.
Being able to walk, they live without being self-sufficient. I'm not sure if claims about higher life expectancy today are really true.
Damn, when you see populations like the Jimenez in Bolivia, and you see women over 80 years old still carrying baskets on their heads, moving through the jungle, that's when you realize that we really used to live much better before, at least in terms of quality of life. I don't know if, of course, sometimes the circumstances made it harder to reach that age. And I also think that the role of those elderly people has changed, because before the elderly were seen as a source of information or a source of
knowledge.
Knowledge has been set aside nowadays, and Alzheimer's prevalence is overwhelming.
I think we're living in the first generation in history that believes it has nothing to learn from its elders. And not only that, but it believes its elders were backward, were chauvinists, some kind of Neanderthals who hadn't evolved enough to understand how life works or how it should work, based on their personal judgment, not biology, circumstances, or contexts. The level of arrogance in the modern generation is incredible. I don't know what you think about it.
Of arrogance, and it's contradictory. Oh, it's paradoxical, since this is the physically weakest and likely most unhealthy generation, not just my opinion. And well, as the political scientist always says, it's the dumbest generation. I mean, even on that level, I think nowadays this is being amplified, especially with the use of artificial intelligence or similar generative artificial intelligence. Because it's a generation that's growing up depending on
technology,
100%, about technology and artificial intelligence to validate things that you probably already think or are capable of reasoning. I think that's more dangerous. I mean, by constantly asking, I'm not against artificial intelligence, but by constantly asking artificial intelligence, should you do this, not do it, or question why you're doing it? It's very dangerous, and I think most people don't understand that these generative AIs, most of their capabilities have been generated by social networks.
I have a question for you, David. Is it true that since intelligence quotient can be measured, generally the new generation always surpasses the previous one in terms of intelligence quotient level? I think that today we are in the first generation that will have a lower intelligence quotient than the previous generation.
I think we are making this hardware worse in every way, because it's the generation with the lowest fertility, lower testosterone levels, less physical ability than any other, and more illness. Likely even more useless, as artificial intelligence causes disruption, since it won't fit into a fully automated society, or at least in a large percentage. As Tony Robbins recently said in an interview, I believe there will be a pandemic of lacking purpose. That is, people will find themselves in a place where you have everything, but at the same time, you will feel completely empty because you don't have a purpose to fulfill.
I completely agree with you. And David, what can be done about it?
In which part? All of them?
All the areas we've mentioned here, especially in this lack of purpose.
I think that recovering the essence we have as human beings, that is not only regaining that contact with what our environment used to be.
What was it telling you?
I don't think we're going to be able to adapt, but beyond recovering our essence, I think it's about knowing or recognizing what our role is within society,
Which is getting harder and harder because obviously there are a lot of distractions.
Above all, I see it in, well, I don't know how old you are, but 29. With young guys who are 19 to 21, I notice their lack of focus is brutal. I have many of them on my team.
But it's because they live distracted.
In a dopaminergic society that offers you easy dopamine with porn, with social media, with fast food, so of course you have dopamine spikes. And then in silence, in the pause, in deep conversations, they don't find satisfaction. And I think that's a problem. We must regain our human essence to find satisfaction in those moments of pause, moments of solitude, moments of boredom that promote creativity.
Absolutely, absolutely, David. Earlier, you mentioned that society has a lot of illnesses that it doesn't even know how to relate to the bad habits we have. Nowadays, what do you mean?
Because I think that people like what you and I see as normal
In our daily lives, being exposed to these lights, being indoors all the time, going to eat at a McDonald's, going out to drink alcohol. I mean, by the way, we can talk about that later if you want. But Generation Z is the generation that has consumed the least alcohol compared to previous generations. That's also interesting.
But when you understand that this concept is normal, aren't you going to question it?
Look, yes. In Latin America, there's a custom that I'm not sure exists in Spain.
When there's an accident on a highway or road, people put up crosses or flowers. They do that here too, as a reminder, so that everyone who passes by knows there's a danger of going at high speeds, etc. If there were a way for you to put a cross at every fast food place, at every liquor store, at every place where those bad habits are promoted, probably by now, there wouldn't be any room left for another cross in any of those places. But since the consequence isn't immediate, it's not like a car accident where you crash into the curb, a tree, or a pole and die instantly. This takes time. Usually, a chronic disease like type 2 diabetes is diagnosed late. It's a diagnosis that's probably made 10 or 20 years after you've done hundreds, if not thousands, of insults day after day throughout all those years.
To your body, you say,
To your body.
So, of course, when you realize that these are late diagnoses, when you realize that the consequences don't come immediately, you realize that it's very hard to make the connection. It's hard for someone to realize this is the result of what they did for 10 or 20 years. The same occurs with cancer, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune diseases. You don't have
records, for example, not even of Alzheimer's in the past.
There's no prevalence either. Actually, none at all.
That's why they're called modern diseases. I mean, that's why they're known as modern diseases, right?
What causes them? What do you think is the main reason?
Behind practically all of them, there's inflammation. And behind all that inflammation, there's
Carbohydrates.
yes, not just carbohydrates, it's processed. I mean, behind inflammation, generally, it's not just diet, it's the overall lifestyle. If you stay up late or are exposed to light at the wrong times, you don't protect nighttime hours for deep rest. There's no repair, it causes inflammation. Alcohol causes inflammation. So it's not just about diet. In fact, that's why it's so complex to make that direct correlation. Like, well, how does X eat McDonald's every day?
And am I going to get sick?
Yes, because
A lot of people,
don't realize correlation isn't causation.
of course.
So not being able to make that direct connection is what makes it so hard for the average person to know that when I eat this, it's going to cause that. That's why people say my grandfather smoked his whole life and never got cancer, right?
Freaking awesome.
But your grandfather was probably outdoors, probably had a manual job, probably had a completely different lifestyle.
Then we do.
So now it's nothing more. In fact, lung cancer is one of the cancers that kills the most people in the world today. Why doesn't the smoker realize that? Because you don't smoke a cigarette and die, so you don't smoke a cigarette and the next day you have lung cancer. Yes,
No, nobody would smoke.
exactly, correct. Even with the warnings on the packs, people still smoke. In fact, I was eating at a restaurant before coming here and there was a girl smoking and, well, an elderly lady. And she justified the fact that she was smoking, even though she was a doctor, by saying that she had a diagnosis, an autoimmune disease, which is, I forgot the name, the one that affects joints. And she said that since she couldn't do anything with her hands because they hurt, I think you must have it. Rheumatoid arthritis?
That's it.
And she couldn't use her hands because they hurt. She distracted herself with a cigarette, but smoking had always been her reality. Since we never associated it directly, you just let it go. It's not the only one, as I said earlier about toxins. If it were, prevalence likely wouldn't be so high now, but it's not the only one. If you live today, there are studies, one just came out not long ago, showing that there's a higher prevalence, a higher risk of Alzheimer's in people who live near golf courses. What does this have to do with golf courses? It's because of all the fertilizers they use. It's known, for example, that people who work double night shifts also have a higher risk of cancer. People who work at airports. This document was released by the United States Department of Defense. They also have a higher risk of prostate cancer in men, for example. So, of course, if it were the only toxic thing, but is it the International Monetary Fund or all electromagnetic frequencies? It's alcohol, it's food, it's your relationships, it's thoughts, it's anxiety, it's depression, it's stress, it's diet, but it's everything else too. That's why it's hard for you to simply tell someone, if you drink that bottle of alcohol every weekend, you're going to have a problem with liver cirrhosis. But how? My uncle smoked all his life, and he's still going strong at 84. So we're always going to have that bias, and we're always going to choose that this happens to bodybuilders. We're always going to pick the one who's still alive. I don't know if you've read the book by Nassim Taleb, The Black Swan. Well, it's one of his books. I don't know if it's The Black Swan. In the world of investments and brokers, when there's someone who does badly one year, one of those people that others hired to invest in stocks for them, if you do badly one year, you're out. The market itself kicks you out. If you're no good, they stop hiring you. But just as one leaves, 100 more come in, so you never get the sense that there are people doing badly. It's the same in the world of bodybuilding. With the use and abuse of anabolic steroids, people face consequences, some unseen. What about deaths from anabolic steroid use and abuse? To begin with, on the death certificate, it's not going to say due to the use and abuse of anabolic steroids. It's going to say due to a heart attack or whatever it was. On the other hand, you stop seeing that person on social media, and just like that, they vanish and you'll never know. And 100 more are coming, and especially many young guys. Nowadays, men are also falling into the use of anabolic steroids, promoted as well by a very young generation of men who are using anabolic steroids and don't talk about the side effects.
David, you've mentioned bodybuilding several times, so let's discuss it now. Why do you criticize or show so much disdain toward the world of bodybuilding? I'm not sure if disdain is the right word, but you've been consistently critical toward that world. Hey, I also agree. Anything that's unhealthy, I'm against it too. I think it should be criticized. If people criticize those who are overweight, obese, with a lot of fat, who don't want to do anything at all to change it, I think we should also criticize those people who become obsessed with a physical status that's unattainable. Unless it's with pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and other things that harm the body.
Well, I don't know if you know that they just launched the Enhanced Games.
No idea. No.
I like it.
Bodybuilding.
The Olympics? No, this is the Olympics with steroids. They literally won as well. In fact, one of Trump's sons is behind it. What they want is to break all the Olympic records. They've already used anabolic steroids in swimming, for example. But anyway, they break the
Records, right?
and they just broke one of them. I don't know if it was in meters, in something, but they just did it. But interestingly, one of those who was competing, who was an Olympic medalist, so in this case, there's use and abuse of anabolic steroids. Since the guy is huge from them, he couldn't even break his own records. But for me, when it comes to bodybuilding, I think it's an aberration against health. And I think most people know it, but they're not able to talk about it publicly. Because those who have realized it probably either participate actively or have participated and have some kind of title. So I'm telling you this because I know a lot of people who have been involved in bodybuilding and don't dare to mention this on social media.
So does that mean all the Mr. Olympia champions are using? They're not natural?
No, Mr. Olympia competitors clearly aren't natural. But in bodybuilding, does that mean, is it against the rules?
Anti-doping rules?
No, but if you mean natural bodybuilding, in theory it's natural, but in practice it's not. Why?
Why?
Nowadays, no, because there are ways. There are ways to work with chemicals for that. So it doesn't seem like you're using any doping.
In natural bodybuilding. A friend of mine told me the other day that the ultimate test is the polygraph. Is that true?
No, I don't know. I don't know what kind of tests they use. There's the usual urine test and common tricks, like bringing someone else's urine. So, but there's very little that's natural about it, and I think that's the last time for me. The only time I went to a competition was the Arnold Classic in Las Vegas. And what you see, I mean, you see a whole bunch of women on stage competing and a lot of women in the audience admiring them without knowing how harmful everything they're doing is for women's health. The ones who have gone up there, they lose menstruation due to extremely low body fat. Well, dehydration, the deficit, also the caloric level of the diet. That's truly unnatural for the human body. Also completely masculinized, especially those who start using steroids.
Anabolic steroids, obviously.
Their jawline becomes more defined, their shoulders get broader. So then they have to get surgery to hide that masculinization. But it's something, as Alexander told me the other day, he's an endocrinologist and he competed in bodybuilding. He told me it's like a sex change therapy without realizing it, but they're becoming more masculine.
Women especially, right? Yes, men.
But
Does it really shorten your life?
yes, totally. I think they're aware of most of it.
Look, I won't criticize anyone's personal decision, but I do think it shouldn't be promoted.
What happens is that I think indirectly, well, there's a trend. I was going to insult it, but there's a trend of young people on social media who talk about it. I don't know if you've seen it, but there are a bunch of crazy people. They all say if your biceps aren't over 35 centimeters, you're not a man.
Do you have 35 centimeter biceps?
They haven't measured it for me, so no. Why would I measure it? In the end, you have a...
Crazy big biceps.
But that's what I was telling you. Are they competing with each other? Why do you want biceps the size of your head? Is it to get another man's attention or to feel superior to another man? Well, it's no.
He doesn't even know how to box.
Of course. Then you realize it's just a competition and they're really just shortening their lives and harming their health.
And helping the usual people?
The pharmaceutical industry.
Alright, one more thing to finish, David. Why does it seem like this society only sells solutions and never teaches you how to avoid the problem?
Why do they give solutions instead of teaching you?
That is, I'm going to summarize the idea. The pharmaceutical industry is never about preventing diseases. It's about alleviating them, not even curing them. They don't want you to disappear as a customer. People don't understand that the health industry wants customers. They want people who come back again and again. So why isn't there any incentive for people not to get sick? People believe that all the advances in health are due to an attempt to achieve widespread well-being for the population. I think we're guinea pigs that they want to give pills to while we sleep.
When you see there's an entire system behind it, you realize it must be maintained. The only way it can be maintained is through that. I mean, through what they're doing. A sick, weak society that is dependent on the whole system that's been set up behind it. I mean, I think that if anyone who has a business wants the customer to come back, you don't want a customer who just comes once. If you go, for example, to get a haircut and you give them a cut, that means they never need to get their hair cut again. You want their hair to grow back so that person has to come back again. So what you need is for that client to come back. And the only way for that person to return is either you make your product addictive, which food engineers avoid discussing, even though they manipulate food to be addictive.
Yes, you know,
There's plenty of scientific evidence for it.
but they don't like discussing addiction. Most will even say sugar isn't addictive, but the thing is,
There's also natural sugar, and then there's modern sugar, which they add to everything, which is a synthetic sugar, so to speak. What's the difference? Is natural sugar healthy?
no, it's not just the sugar, but the combination. These products contain ingredients that make them hyperpalatable, which is why I say they're manipulated to become addictive, because they always return. If you create cookie X, do you want customers to return for it? What's curious is that in the processed food industry, whether it's fast food or even supermarket processed foods, you don't care if the person returns for your brand specifically. What matters is that they come back. If you sell this tomorrow, doesn't matter to you. Customers might choose your competitor, but you want them to keep buying from you. Why is that important? In the end, what you want is to keep the person hooked, in the sense that if you have a fast food chain, you don't care if the person goes to your competitor tomorrow. What you want is for them to come back to you. That's why nowadays fast food chains even offer breakfast. They know you're not going to have breakfast at McDonald's, then have lunch at McDonald's, and then have dinner at McDonald's. You'll probably have breakfast at Starbucks, lunch at McDonald's, and dinner at Pizza Hut. But you'll come back, whether it's one or the other. So when you realize that the intention is simply to keep you inside, no matter where you are, you realize that what they're doing is very sinister. Without getting into conspiracies or all these stories, just looking at it as a business, they want you to come back as a customer. And what was I telling you before? That if you're not here eating processed food, which as a consequence leads to illness, that's where you'll be. That's where they offer you that solution. A solution that's really just a pharmaceutical dependency and doesn't actually fix anything for you.
Gentlemen, today's show has been incredible. Thank you so much, David. And today we have a surprise. Today the exclusive section is going to be public because there aren't many questions, and I want you to see how you can interact with the guests we bring here. I'll post the link in the pinned comments of my private community, where, along with the exclusive factory sections, you will have access to all my ebooks, access to exclusive community live streams to interact, ask questions, and get to know me through organized meetups. I also want you to know that you have access to all the studies that support my way of thinking. Data, statistics, like-minded people, extremely necessary, an ecosystem, thank you, with shared values and principles to grow as a person. We're starting with this exclusive section, the only time we'll do it this way. Hey, thank you for your question. Let's get started. How true is muscle memory? I'll summarize. I cured an illness that caused me to lose 30 kilos. I went from skin and bones to strong like a bull in 5 months of training. Amazing gains. Speed, reaction, explosiveness. No gym, just Chinese Sanda mixed martial arts. I can't find any logic to it that's, let's say, scientific. Shout out to both of you legends. Antonio, brother, shout out to you. What do you think about this?
That's awesome, Darita, right? First, congratulations, Antonio, because honestly, it's an incredible achievement. Yeah, when you lose, especially muscle mass. And he already gave the answer. There really is such a thing as a muscle memory. The body has the ability to remember what it was or where it was. And that's why it's easier for someone who once had a good physique and lost it to regain it. So it's simply the way our body remembers, especially at the genetic level, so it can recover it more easily. Our brain prioritizes our survival above all else. For it to become a foundation, it must do more than just remember at the genetic level of things that have happened to us, but it even remembers things that may have happened to our parents, even our grandparents. I'm part of fascinating experiments. Experiments on mice showed that after experiencing trauma, mice remember it. And not only that, but its children and grandchildren as well. So, but is this a matter of survival? So it really is, like Antonio says, we have muscle memory, and that's why, as the famous saying goes, once you had it, you keep some of it. If you had a skill, if you had a physique, a certain level of muscle mass, you can recover it more easily than someone who never had it.
Amazing, David. Last question. Do you recommend this?
If someone is doing everything right, getting sun and eating protein-rich foods, strength training and doing everything that's necessary, doing the work day by day, I think these types of drinks are good, especially to find that variety within the routine. A lot of people do get bored with hydration when it's always just water, but well, there are always interesting options like the drink you've launched on the market.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. If you ever put a stick in the drink, I'll cut it. Just kidding. We don't cut anything here. The link to buy stories, gentlemen, is in the description. The private community is in the pinned comment. David, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Brother, thank you.
Gentlemen, see you in the next episode of The Factory.